Hi, everybody. Welcome. If you're just joining us, welcome. We're looking forward to our evening together. Thank you, everybody, for being here with us tonight. Looks like most people have entered, and I think we have a few more people coming in, but I will get started because I always like to keep us on time and not punish the punctual. So welcome. Thank you for joining our social and emotional learning and Jewish education program this evening. I'm Emily Fox, the Director of Jewish Educational Initiatives for at the Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West. And I'm joined here by my colleague, Rebecca Wenetic, the Manager of Community Inclusion and Program Services. And we work directly with our religious schools, which many of you are teachers at, as well as early childhood centers. We may have a few of you as well, and supporting your work in advancing excellence in Jewish education and surviving these days, which I know you are all doing as well as thriving. We've really just been in awe of the incredible work that you've done over the past 2 years. I can't believe I'm saying that. And we are really inspired by how you inspire our community's learners and their families. We know that when you committed to teaching, you never imagined classrooms quite like what you've had to create, and you've all done so with grace and such great enthusiasm. And we at the Federation are incredibly grateful for your dedication, and we just want you to know how much we support you as well, both as professionals and personally. During this time, Federation is supporting our agencies who are on the front lines caring for our elderly, providing food for those who need it, and are available for mental health support, among so many other things. And we here at Federation and our community will be happy to connect you and others with the right services. So please don't hesitate to be in touch if you or someone you know needs services such as those. And all of this is made possible by the generosity of our community members through Federation's annual campaign. So before I introduce our speaker, I just want to make a couple announcements and share a few words of Torah, because we are all here. We are Jewish educators. It's nice to learn together. So I invite you to put your name and your school in the chat so that everybody knows who each other is. And everybody will be muted for the first part. And if you have a question, we invite you to type it into the chat. And Becca and I will help facilitate Q&A. And there may be parts that Nancy asks you to unmute. So feel free to do so at certain points. It's going to be a very interactive session. So this week, we read one of the most well-known parshiot, the Shalach, where the Israelites finally get permission from Pharaoh to leave Egypt, and they get the hell out of town, only to find that we all know the story, once again he has changed his mind, and he's narrowing in on them as they approach the Sea of Reeds. We know this story well, so I won't go into all the details, but you may or may not know the story of Nachshon, which is my favorite midrash in the entire story that we read. So our rabbis teach that when the Israelites stood at the foot of the sea and they were overwhelmed by the water that was in front of them, they were so very fearful of Pharaoh's army, which was behind them. There was one man who was willing to take a risk, one step at a time. Nachshon walked into the sea full of courage and full of belief. And just as his lips went underwater, the water receded, and the Israelites rejoiced, and they escaped the Egyptians. Right now, you are our Nachshons. The water is high, our students are overwhelmed, and yet you are here today. You are full of courage, and you're full of belief that you can and will make a difference for them. And we are so grateful that you are here, dedicated to your own learning. We're also grateful to be here today and learn with our gifted teacher, Nancy Parks. Nancy is an educational consultant and founder of J Teach Now. Much of her work is focused on helping Jewish educators and directors integrate social, emotional, and spiritual learning in their settings. Several of her articles on the topic have appeared in eJewish Philanthropy, and she's currently working on an SESL toolkit for Jewish educators. For the past 2 years, Nancy has supported and mentored educators enrolled in a certification program in social emotional learning at Rutgers University as they translate their learning into their Jewish educational settings. She is also a founding member of SESL for Jewish Ed, a collaborative for promoting holistic growth for learners and educators in all Jewish settings. Nancy served as the Director of Congregational Learning at Temple Israel Center in White Plains for 10 years and is outspoken advocate for the partnership between rabbis and educators in bringing about innovation and change in the congregational school setting. Nancy received her master's degree in Jewish Studies and Education at the William Davidson School of Education at JTS and is currently earning her PhD, her EDD there. Thank you, Nancy, for joining us today, and I invite you to take it away.
Thanks so much, Emily. I loved your learning tonight about Nachshon. It's a favorite of mine, and I couldn't agree more that, especially now, our teachers and also our students are certainly being brave and show a lot of courage every time they step into any kind of learning experience. So thank you so much for inspiring that and teaching that tonight. So I'm really thrilled to be here. I'm going to share my screen with all of you. And just give me a minute to put it in presentation mode and we'll get started. There we go. Okay. Before we begin, I want to recognize all the wisdom and experience you bring to our learning today. Please share that wisdom, your thoughts, your questions, your insights. It'll be a richer learning experience when we all learn from each other. Also, I'm going to be asking you in a variety of ways to participate. I certainly hope that you will do so. So I'm going to thank you in advance for that. So what will our learning look like? We're going to take a moment to talk about collaborative norms. That is, what do we need for optimal learning to take place tonight? We're going to be checking in with ourselves and with each other. It wouldn't be a social emotional learning workshop if we didn't do that. I realize some of you may be familiar with SEL. Maybe some of the material I'm sharing tonight will be somewhat repetitive. I don't see that as a bad thing. Again, I invite you to share your wisdom and your experience with us. And yet for others, this may be the first time you're really learning and diving into social emotional learning in a formal manner. So that we're all on the same page, I'm going to briefly review what social emotional learning is and why it's so important. We're going to address the proverbial elephant in the room, COVID, and why we need to be paying attention to the emotions of our students, especially now, as well as our own emotions. We're going to be looking at each of the social emotional competencies defined by CASEL. That is an organization that really focuses in on social emotional learning. And I'll be sharing strategies and tools that we can use to teach the skills necessary to acquire these competencies. And at the end, we'll be reflecting on our learning, and I'll be asking you to share some of your thoughts. Now, I want to point out that providing you with this brief outline and going over it with you is directly connected to social and emotional learning. For some learners, not knowing what their learning is going to look like or what the schedule is going to be can be anxiety provoking. Agendas for meeting serve the same exact purpose. So an outline, an agenda, and going over it with your learners can be a tool for lowering the learners' or participants' anxiety. So let's talk about collaborative norms. Another term for collaborative norms is norms of engagement. In the classroom, we often call this a classroom Brit. What I find so interesting is that we often skip over this step when we're learning online or when we're learning with adults. Collaborative norms help us answer the question, how can we together create an optimal climate for learning? Because we know our environment and how we set up that environment influences the learning experience. So I took the liberty of starting a list of norms. The first norm is self-monitoring the use of electronics. Maybe having your cell phone out is distracting. Maybe not having it nearby is equally as distracting. You know what works best for you. Set up that environment so that it is less distracting so that you can focus your attention on the learning. It's really hard to exercise wait time. We're going to try and pause when necessary and sometimes sit in the silence. We communicate an awful lot with our bodies. Let's be aware of the messages we're communicating to each other through eye contact, facial expressions. We're going to seek to understand what someone shares when someone shares or asks a question, always giving them the benefit of the doubt and checking for assumptions. We're also going to try to give space for everyone to be seen and heard. So what I'd like you to do now is put in the chat what you need for optimal learning to happen for you. What else would you add to that list? And as people are writing their responses, please take note of them. Read what they're putting in the chat. This is about how we together create an environment for optimal learning. We need to be aware of what each of us needs so that together we can create that environment, and that helps build the social emotional competency of social awareness. So I'm going to exercise some wait time. I'm going to ask you to please take a minute to think and write what you need for optimal learning to take place in the chat. Okay, these are wonderful. Thank you so much. I am taking note of these norms, and you know what? Let's check in toward the end and see how we did. These are wonderful. Thank you. And I hope everyone took some time to read through what people actually wrote. I want to say one more thing about collaborative norms. Whereas we often make our list, usually, typically, in the beginning of the year, this is something we need to come back to every few weeks to see how we're doing in reaching those norms. And remember that collaborative norms, any norms that we set, may also evolve over time. So that's just something to keep in mind. Let's take a moment to check in with ourselves and with each other. Don't you kind of wish you were at a beach and not in this cold weather? I do. What I'm going to ask you to do is just find a comfortable seated position. I would recommend that you sit with your back straight because we're going to be breathing, and that allows for a deeper breath. And I invite you, if you're comfortable, to close your eyes. And all we're going to do is take a deep breath in through our nose and slowly let it out through our mouth. Again, deep breath in and let it out through your mouth. And now I just want you to breathe at your own pace. And I want you to note, what's your current head and heart space? Are there two words that best describe your current head and heart space? What I'd like you to do once you have those words is please write it down on a piece of paper that you might have nearby. So two words that might describe your current head and heart space. I'm going to do the same. Okay. Now I want you to take a moment to look at those words that you wrote down. Will these emotions or these states of being that you have, that you wrote down, will they help or hinder your learning with us? What do you think? Will those emotions that you wrote down help or hinder your learning? Just take note of it. We're going to come back to this. Okay, let's take 2 more breaths in. Nice deep breath in. Let it out. One more time, let it in. And let it out. Right. If you noticed, I was breathing with you and also wrote down 2 words. Modeling is really important when we're teaching and practicing social and emotional skills. So let's start with, dive into this what social emotional learning is. First of all, learning is a relational and social process, and so is teaching. Relationships form the foundation of all our learning experiences. Relationships between the teacher and the learner, between the learners, and between colleagues. And we know that when there exists positive relationships, there's a better learning atmosphere. Kids and adults feel safer to explore and question and share, and that leads to better academic achievement. When kids feel safe, there are less behavioral issues, and that leads to a more positive association with learning, which means that our learners then are able to enter into any learning experience with a more positive attitude and less anxiety. And of course, that's true for learners of any age. And when they're positive relationships, everybody feels better about what they do. They feel more comfortable trying new things and asking questions. So I thought we'd spend a few minutes getting to know each other, forming those relationships. So I am going to stop the share so that I can see everybody. What I would recommend is, if you aren't in gallery mode, to do that so that we can see everybody. And what I'm going to first ask you to do is rename yourself to the name you want to be referred to during our learning together. So for instance, I'm going to change mine from Nancy Parks to Nancy. So I'm going to invite everybody to do that. First, just rename yourself. You can do that by just clicking on the 3 dots. Great. Okay, now I'm going to ask everybody to turn off your video. Turn off your video. You can do that by hitting the stop video on the bottom left-hand side of your screen. Okay, everybody's video looks like it's almost off. Okay. So what I want you to do, I'm going to read a statement, and if it's true for you, I want you to turn your video on. So, for dessert, you would always choose ice cream over cake or cookies. If that's true for you, turn your video on. Come on, let me see all those ice cream lovers. Mm-hmm. I could have ice cream for breakfast, I'm just saying. Right? Yes. Okay, great. Video's off. For vacation, you would always choose the mountains over the beach. Turn your video on if that's true for you. Oh, it looks like we have more beach lovers than mountains. I like a lake. I'm not crazy about the sand. Great. Okay, video's off. All right, I want you to think about where you sing more often, in the shower or in the car. If you sing more often in the car, turn your video on. Oh, whoa. Okay, so next time I'm at a light and I look over and I see you singing in the car, right? How many times have we seen that? We got a lot. We have very few people who sing in the shower. Or I shouldn't say that. You sing more often in the car. Okay, fair enough. Okay, now what I'd like you to do is, on the bottom of your screen, you'll see a reaction button. It looks like an emoji with a little plus. If you click on that, There are quite a few emojis where those 3 dots are. Click on an emoji that best illustrates how you're feeling right now. I have to look at the other, I have to go to the other screen. Great. Ooh, we got some people who are tired. Maybe I hope to perk you up a little bit. Okay, so is this emotion different than the emotion that you felt before? We know that emotions aren't static. And also when you build relationships, hopefully it lightens your mood a little bit. So besides learning a little bit about who likes ice cream and who sings in the car, hopefully you feel a little bit more uplifted. Okay, let me go back to sharing my screen. Oh, I gotta get all the way down here. Okay. Sorry about that. There we go. Okay. So why all this attention to emotions and how we're feeling? Because teaching and learning are also very emotional experiences. And this is complicated even more so by COVID. These pictures are pretty accurate illustrations of what many of our learning experiences and teaching experiences look like this year. Emotions are prime motivators of behavior, and they can help both hinder and help someone's learning. Strong emotions can motivate someone to learn, and they can also completely shut you down and paralyze you from learning. And we certainly don't need research to tell us that anxiety, depression, and stress have increased for learners of all ages, including teachers, since March of 2020. But that's certainly what the research is showing. So now I want you to think about back, right when you came back to school after the winter break, what were the emotions you felt? In a typical year, regardless of the emotion, it might be mixed, it might be complicated, but it certainly would be high. And again, even more so this year. Given the uncertainty we're all facing in light of COVID, emotions such as anxiety and stress will remain high. So we need to offer opportunities for our learners to express those emotions, because what we do know is that ignoring them does not make them go away. In fact, quite the contrary. Acknowledging them, honoring them, recognizing them, it actually lessens the intensity and mitigates the effect they have on us. And identifying and expressing them is just the first step. But again, we're going to talk more about that. So here are a few things just to keep in mind about emotions. Emotions are not good or bad. They just give us information. No judgment is hung on a particular emotion. They just give us information. Sometimes we feel more than one emotion at a time. That's why I asked you in the beginning, what was your current head and heart space? Maybe they were the same, but more often than not, they're different. And the third thing is that emotions are contagious. But regardless, it's one of the reasons we need to pay attention to that's one of the reasons I should say, we need to pay attention to our own emotions as leaders and teachers, because we often set the emotional tone in our learning spaces. Now, as I mentioned, acknowledging emotions is only the first step. We also need to teach and practice strategies to help us manage those emotions. And that's where the skills of social emotional learning come in. Social emotional learning is an approach to learning that teaches students skills to be able to acquire these 5 competencies identified by CASEL, which is the Collaborative for Academic and Social Emotional Learning. They're self-awareness and self-management, social awareness and relationship skills, and responsible decision-making. But of course, the question, especially as teachers, is, well, how do we acquire these skills? Like any skill, they need to be taught. There's this erroneous assumption that somehow these skills will just be picked up, or that maybe they're learning them at home. We need to teach them. And like all good learning, we need to scaffold that learning and teach them in a developmentally appropriate manner. We also need to model them. We need to do so that our students see them in action. They learn an awful lot from observation, and they're acutely aware when our actions don't align with our words. Now, ideally, these skills are modeled by everybody in the school, in and out of the classroom, not only the teacher, but the ed director or principal, the clergy, the administrative staff, and by the way, adults outside of school too. That's the ideal. And because this skill is something that they're learning, we need to offer prompts, which serve as an important reminder of the skill and when and how best to implement it in a given situation. And lastly, we need to practice them. Students need multiple and various opportunities to practice the skills that they're learning, so that when they call upon these skills, when they're needed, they don't revert back to what they typically do. And with all practice, we need to offer praise, feedback, and provide opportunities for reflection. I'm going to give you examples of all of these steps throughout the learning. So I want to pause for a minute. That was a rather quick introduction. And I just want to know if there are any questions or comments before we move forward. I'm going to exercise some wait time. Any questions or comments? Everyone feel they have a pretty good handle? How do you allow for emotions while running a class? So Gabby, I'm wondering if, or make space for them. So I am going to show you how to integrate some of these skills and how to teach some of these skills into what you're already doing. So hopefully I'll answer that question as we go along. If I don't, remind me at the end. If you feel I haven't answered your question, come back to it. But I'm going to show you how we can create space for it, if you will.
Nancy, I think Abra had a question also.
Sure, Amra.
Thanks, Becca. I was thinking as you were talking about the no judgment about emotions, and I was in a conversation the other day where someone said it's just important to not get emotional. And I was listening to you saying, like, emotions are information, and if we discourage people from being emotional, how do we get the information about where they are? And I'm thinking about how I could go back to that person and reframe that conversation a little bit differently with just with that one liner in my mind. Thank you.
So thank you for bringing that up. It's interesting when people say, you know, why are you getting so emotional? I always wonder, like, what are they really asking? But there's a difference between experiencing in what I would call intense emotions that interfere with the way we communicate and how we make decisions, right? That's a different scenario than being, I think I'm passionate about social emotional learning, right? So I think there's a difference between someone calling out emotions as interfering with, right, a positive learning experience or positive, appropriate behavior versus sharing information in a way that might be indicative of excitement or passion, right? One of the things, you know, I was thinking about with judgment is that we often tell people that anger is a negative emotion. But anger can be incredibly motivating to correct injustices. We get angry when we perceive things not to be fair, right? That can be an incredibly motivating emotion. Again, it's the intensity of that emotion and doesn't interfere with appropriate behavior and decision making. Does that help answer your question? Okay. All right. I'd love to know how it goes after you speak with them. Okay. Let's jump into talking about emotions, let's talk about self-awareness. So let me just see if I can move my screen a little bit. I'm assuming everyone can see it okay? Yes? Okay, because I'm having a little trouble seeing it, but as long as you are. Okay. Self-awareness is the ability to understand one's emotions, their thoughts, their values, and how they influence behavior. Abra, this goes exactly to your question. It's about understanding what you're feeling and how that might influence your behavior. Now, there are a lot of mood meters out there, and perhaps some of you are already using them and familiar with the ones I have up on the screen. What I want to emphasize here is that whichever mood meter you decide to use, like all good learning, it needs to be scaffolded so that your learners continue to build an emotional vocabulary and the skills they need for this competency of self-awareness. So you'll see that all 4 of these mood meters have the same 4 quadrants and colors. This allows you to build on what they already know and are familiar with, because before you even get into a conversation with some of our littlest learners, you might want to ask them, what color do they feel? You'd be very surprised what kind of responses you might get. The first 2 use emojis. Again, especially for our youngest learners, they can choose, they don't need the words. They will tell you by looking at those emojis what they think those emojis represent. The second one, of course, has so many more. Again, building our emotional vocabulary, this idea that we can feel a lot of different emotions. The second 2, of course, add words. And that last one, which is a mood meter designed by Dr. Mark Brackett, he's the director of the Emotional Intelligence Center at Yale University, has many, many words. Some people find this mood meter overwhelming. I will tell you, I've seen it used with learners as young as 3rd grade, again, if the learning is scaffolded. It's really important to build emotional vocabulary so that our students understand the difference between being angry and frustrated, between being sad and lonely. And I know you never hear this in your schools, but when a student tells you they are bored, quite often they're not bored. They're confused, they're lonely, they're sad. We need to give them the emotional vocabulary and for them to understand what they're feeling so that they can implement strategies to shift that emotion if necessary. Here's another tool. It's called a feelings fingerprint. What I love about this tool is that we often feel sensations in our body before we're even able to articulate what we're feeling. So for example, I know when I start to feel tension in my jaw back here, I start to clench my teeth, I'm feeling pretty angry. So using this feeling fingerprints can help our learners understand what they're feeling. So for example, how does my body tell me when I'm feeling angry, when I'm feeling frustrated? What signals is my body sending me? And just as importantly, what are trigger situations? In what situations do I often feel this way? When do I find it hard to be calm? Being able to identify which situations may trigger these emotions is empowering. It allows us to implement strategies to manage those emotions. I never went into a board meeting. I still don't, without taking a few breaths. I know I'm feeling anxious about presenting. That's empowering once I now have strategies to actually lessen that anxiety. Here's another way to use a feelings fingerprints. That's more of a worksheet. We know that some students like to sit and actually think about things and write things. This is a worksheet that allows them to do that. Like the feelings fingerprint, it asks them to think about and identify how they feel in their bodies when they experience certain emotions. Because again, sometimes our body tells us what we're feeling before we're even able to name it. And again, you can also use this for trigger situations. So for example, if you look at grades K through 2, the second sentence, An example might be, I know I'm feeling excited when in my body, I feel my heart beating fast. For grades 6 through 12, I tend to feel anxious when I'm called by the teacher unexpectedly or when I'm asked to read aloud. One other thing I want to mention, so often when someone tells us, for example, they're feeling sad, our knee-jerk response is, oh, please don't feel sad. We care about our students. We never want anyone to feel sad. But by asking them not to be sad, we may be inadvertently sending the message that feeling sad is not okay. What we want to do is validate that feeling. Why are you feeling sad? Do you want to continue feeling sad? Sometimes we need to give students some space to feel that way. Of course, not for too long. And then we can help them shift that emotion by asking, what can I do to help you feel less sad? What strategy can you implement to shift that emotion? Any questions about this? Building self-awareness is about giving students the skills to identify emotions and to understand how their emotions affect their behavior. We're good with self-awareness. I can go on. Yes? Okay. Let's talk about self-management. The social emotional competency of self-management gives our learners, gives ourselves the strategies to help manage our emotions. All too often, we check in with our students, we ask them how they're feeling. That's great, because again, acknowledging and recognizing feelings can actually lower their intensity. But we often don't follow this up with teaching them strategies to actually self-regulate. Self-management is all about self-regulation, the ability to effectively manage our emotions and behaviors. And central to this is breathing. When we slow down our breathing, it slows down our heart rate, it slows down our blood pressure. It actually sends a message to the parasympathetic nervous system in our bodies to calm down. So I'm going to actually teach you 5 different breathing strategies for you to practice along with me, to learn along with me. I think it might be best if I stop the share, just so that you can all see me and I can see you. I'm just concerned I may forget all of them. I may forget all of them, but we're gonna give it a shot. Okay, here we go. Everybody can see me okay? Okay. I'm gonna tilt my computer down a little bit so you can see. The first thing I want you to do is put one hand on your chest and one hand on your belly. I can see you. Okay, here we go. When we're excited or feeling really high emotions, we tend to breathe up here from the chest. What we want to do is breathe from the belly, from down here. So what I want you to do is when you take a deep breath in, I actually want you to feel your belly push against your hand, filling your belly first and then your chest. So let's take a deep breath in, filling the belly and then the chest, and then let it out from the chest and then the belly. Again, deep breath in, filling the belly and then the chest, and let it out from the chest and then the belly. Great. Relaxing, no? Okay, let's try another one. Love to do this with our youngest learners. I have 2 grandsons who are 3, and I've actually taught this to them because they both are pretty stubborn and have some tempers. Here we go. We're going to pretend in one hand we have a flower, and in one hand we have a candle. So what we're going to do is smell the flower, blow out the candle. Again, smell the flower, and blow out the candle. Easy enough to do, right? Just getting them to practice that and do that lowers the intensity of emotions. Okay, this one you don't have to do By holding up your hand, you're just going to do it along with me. So as I bring my finger up along the side of my thumb, you're going to inhale. And as I go down, you're going to exhale. So inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, inhale, exhale, inhale, and exhale. Easy to do. Easy to do. Another one. This is one of my favorites because I'm a visual learner. This is a Hoberman Sphere. When I open it up, you're going to inhale, and when I close it, you're going to exhale. Inhale, filling the belly and then the chest, and exhale from the chest and then the belly. Inhale, exhale. One more, inhale, and exhale. Great. And the last one. So I learned this from my early childhood educators, and it's become one of my favorite tools. It's a calming jar. Maybe you're familiar with it. It's basically, well, how I made mine was just glitter glue and some water. And basically what you do is you're going to shake it, and as they watch the glitter drop down, they're just going to breathe. I actually was shocked how calming I found this to be. What I like about this is that you can make these jars in all different kinds of sizes. The short ones for our littlest learners, you can have many of them in the classroom. These are great, again, to stop them, have them focus their attention on their breathing. Okay. Any questions about our self-management? I do want to say one thing about this. It's really, really important to model this for our learners, right? We can be teaching it and we can practice it. That's great. But we can also model it. So again, I'm sure this never happens in your school, but let's say I've asked all of you to put your, hand on your chest and a hand on your stomach, and none of you did it. Or let's say I'm giving directions to my students and none of them are following directions. How I can model self-awareness and self-management would be, I have to pause for a minute. I'm feeling really frustrated that nobody is listening. I'm going to take some deep breaths. And now I'm going to try to give the directions in a different way, in a way that maybe you'll hear me better. That's modeling for our students. Now, you may say that is really unnatural. It is because you've never done it before. And just like I'm sure a lot of you were rolling your eyes when I was asking you to breathe before we did that check-in. Okay, maybe you weren't rolling your eyes outwardly, but inwardly, some of you certainly were. It's because we're not used to doing it. But when we share with our learners our reason, our process of why we're doing things, we are modeling for them that we feel emotions, that we can articulate and name them, how to manage them, and how by doing so allows us to try again. It builds resiliency as well. And by the way, when you do this, it is amazing how everybody all of a sudden just stops and starts breathing with you, even if they don't realize it. It's a way of stopping and getting their attention and having them notice as well. Any questions about this? Somebody I see has a Hoberman Sphere. Come on, they're just the best. Francine, you have a question? Sure. Can you unmute? There you go.
I'm just thinking that I used to teach early childhood. I'm teaching a third grade in Hebrew school right now. But like I know with young children, if they're really out of control, I'm wondering if this is even doable.
So the first thing I want to say about early childhood educators, they rock at social emotional learning. This is what they spend most of their time doing. So when you say when students are out of control, at any age, it's going to be very hard to get them to pause if you have not taught them the skills and if you haven't practiced them. So that's the first thing, right? Because so one of my favorite quotes I ever saw was, never in the history of calm down did someone calm down by being told to calm down, right? By telling someone to calm down, that's not going to, if they haven't learned the strategies to calm down, it doesn't work. So it's about building those skills and having certain, what I call prompts, in getting people in that will alert them and make them notice that, oh, this is a time that I'm supposed to implement a particular strategy. So I think it's about not only teaching and modeling, but actually having prompts to remind them, oh, this is a time when I should be using self-management skills. I can give you an example.
I use a singing bowl.
Oh, I was just, who said that? Okay,
Carol?
Carol, I was just bringing out my singing bowl. This is what I use. So Carol, talk a little bit about that.
Because I don't like to yell above the kids because they just get louder. And I don't always have access to flicking the lights off, which always makes some of my kids stim anyway. The singing bowl, I teach them in the beginning of the school year that when I ring the bell, I do it like 3 or 4 times. You close your eyes, we go through, take a breath, let it out like a lion, all different ways. So then as the year goes on, once they know that if I ring that bell, everybody stops and they don't all take a breath, but they know that I'm trying to get their attention.
So that I just brought out my singing bowl. I too use this. I can hit it. You can hear it. But again, you have to teach them this. How I use it is I hit it and I ask them to raise their hand when they can no longer hear the sound. So that gets their attention. They have to listen. But again, you have to teach that and prompt them, and understand that they're not always going to know in situations when they have to calm down. Great question. And thank you, Carol, so much for sharing. Anybody else before we move on? You know what, one thing I'll share with you. I like to create what I call cozy corners. I wish I knew who came up with that phrase. It was not me. I don't remember where I first heard it, but these are specific areas where students can go when they're experiencing intense emotions, and there are prompts there and tools that they can use to help self-regulate. I love this term cozy corners because it's not punitive in any way. Who wouldn't want a cozy corner? I could use one in my house, I suppose. So this is something, again, that you can think about. How can you have, or how can you create something like this? And again, the prompts, the tools are there to serve as prompts. Okay. Let's go on to self-awareness, social awareness rather. Social awareness is about teaching the skills to develop empathy and caring. It's all about being able to understand the perspective of somebody else. And that includes people from diverse backgrounds, cultures, and contexts. I want to share a tool called Footprints that helps build this skill. Now, first of all, I realize there's a lot on the slide. Don't read it. I'm going to break it down. The reason why I have all this information on the slide is because we're going to share this with you after the workshop. But this is literally asking our learners to step into the shoes of someone else to understand how they might be feeling. This tool builds empathy and helps build a caring learning atmosphere and environment. So let me give you an example of when you might use this. Let's imagine there are 2 students who are working on a project together and an argument ensues. This is how you might use the tool. First of all, you're literally going to ask the students to trace their feet and cut out 2 sets of footprints. Now, of course, with our younger learners, it's a lot easier to have these footprints made already and already cut out. What I love to do with our young learners is ask them to decorate it and to show me how these shoes, why would I know that these shoes are theirs? What does it tell me about who they are or something that they like? So you have these 2 sets of footprints. This immediately causes them to pause and get actively engaged. Then the 2 students are going to face each other. They're going to put their footprints down, and they're literally going to stand into their own footsteps. And then they have to decide who's going to speak first. So in this case, student 1, using the language, I think, I feel, I want, says, I think you aren't being fair. I feel frustrated. I want you to listen to me. Student 2 is just listening at this point. Then the students switch positions. Student 2 literally steps into the speaker's footsteps and, using the language you think, you feel, you want, says, you think I'm not being fair. You feel frustrated. You want me to listen to you. And then they check for understanding. Is that right? And then they're going to repeat the process for student number 2. Student 2 gets to talk about what they're feeling as well. And when student 2 is done, they're going to try to find a solution using the language, how about we? This is not as complicated as it may seem. I've used this tool with students, with teachers, with board members. It's an incredibly effective tool in helping people understand what someone else might be thinking or feeling in a safe way. And it builds the skill of empathy and the competency of social awareness. You can also integrate this into your Torah curriculum and ask students to step into the character's shoes of any Torah story. When Emily shared that beautiful learning about Nachshon, stepping in the shoes of Nachshon, how did Nachshon feel when he was standing there as the Egyptians were in hot pursuit? What did it feel like walking into that water? We'll be talking more about that in a moment. Relationship skills are so important. We start building relationships and a sense of belonging with our staff and our students with the first correspondence we send to them and during our first interaction with them. And that requires the social emotional competency of relationship skills, the ability to develop and maintain healthy relationships. And more specifically, that involves communication skills. How do we talk to each other? How do we listen to each other? Here's one tool called BEST that you can use for communication skills. And by the way, you can change the graphics and the words for younger learners. As you can see, there are 4 components of BEST: body language, eye contact, saying appropriate words, and tone of voice. And all of these components are going to take on new importance because many of us are now wearing masks. This chart can also serve as a prompt to remind learners when to use these skills. Maybe you have it up in your classroom. Maybe you have it on a Zoom screen. It can serve as a prompt. Now, some interesting statistics. We communicate up to 55% with our bodies. Facial expressions, body gestures, 55% eye contact, and up to 38% with the tone that we use. That's only 8% for the words that we choose. That's not saying that words aren't important, but it does kind of put in perspective how important body language and tone of voice is. So how can we teach this while also integrating it into our curriculum? I want to use the Torah stories again as an example. Emily spoke about Bishalach, which is this week's Torah portion. Last week's was Bo. It spoke about the last plagues, excuse me, and they're descending on Egypt. And I just took some pictures of Pharaoh and Moses. And I want, as you look at these pictures, what are some of the things communicated just by their facial expressions and body postures. What are some of the differences communicated in these pictures, and what are some of the similarities? Anybody want to take a stab at this? You can just unmute. What are some of the things you see? What are they communicating with their facial expressions and body postures?
You see when Pharaoh's arms are crossed, he's very closed-minded, and in the upper left, that very stern face, like he's not even listening. But then on the right, he appears to be interested.
So, it's funny. I had to learn when I first took a course on body language. I didn't realize how often I sat with my arms closed and what that conveyed. And just like you said, this shutting off. What about facial expressions? What is this one on the top right, where, Pharaoh is looking at Moses, he's kind of holding his chin. What do you imagine that's conveying?
He's thinking about it. He's considering what to do.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
He also has a question kind of look in his face,
Mm-hmm. That's
like
right.
he's questioning something.
That's right.
And he's actually listening, perhaps, to what Moses is saying to him.
So I love that. In other words, where in some of the other ones, they're not necessarily really looking like they're looking at each other, right? Or one's out of the corner of their eye, but here, absolutely direct on. Now, again, some of our students, by the way, may have trouble with eye contact. We have to recognize that. And this is one way, again, to build the competency of social awareness by looking at characters, or illustrations, I should say, of characters. Here are a few more. Again, look at these pictures of Pharaoh. They illustrate very different emotions. He is communicating very different things with his body and facial expressions. Here's another tool that you can use. Here's an excerpt of the dialogue that takes place between Moses and Pharaoh after the plague of darkness that's descended on Egypt. And Pharaoh is summons Moses to appear before him. Not a lot of lines, right? This isn't a lot of dialogue. You can ask your learners to role play, and using tone of voice, using their bodies, using facial expressions to demonstrate how Moses and Pharaoh may have sounded if they were angry, if they were sad, if they were frustrated, if they were scared. And by the way, students who love to act, they will shine. Give them that opportunity. Another way you can use this, if you have two students, well, actually here you have a narrator. If you have 3 students up there, you give them the dialogue. You can actually write down or whisper in their ear what emotion that you would like them to convey. Have them do it by reading the dialogue, and then asking the learners who are watching, what do they think the emotion was that Pharaoh was feeling, that Moses was feeling, based on what you told them. This all builds a social emotional competency of social awareness. It also helps bring back this, not bring back, but helps them think more about the competency of self-awareness and how emotions affect behavior. Any questions? This could be fun, right? Okay, let's talk about listening skills. I mentioned that communication, relationship skills, the center of it is communication. That includes listening. So before we talk any further about how we teach it and how we practice it, we're going to put you into breakout rooms to discuss these 2 texts. I'm going to give you a link in the chat. I'll put it in the chat. And you'll be able to access the text. You will also see on the text, on the document, that I've included questions to kind of guide the conversation, as well as what I call participation starters. Often when we put people in small groups, or your students in small groups, we just make the assumption that everybody feels comfortable learning. with somebody else or in small groups. And yet we know that that's not often the case. Participation starters, which is based on the work of Orit Kent and Allison Cook, actually gives them the language to enter into the conversation and stay involved. So I believe you're going to be in breakout room groups of 3 or 4 or 2 or 3 for 10 minutes. And we'll be back to talk about how we teach listening after you talk about these texts. Enjoy your time learning with each other. Welcome back, everybody. Do we have everyone? I think we do. I hope you had a meaningful discussion about listening and the heart. I'm going to recommend again that all of you put your view in gallery. So if you click on the view, you'll see those little boxes. If you click on that and click on gallery so we can see each other. So I asked you to talk about this, look at those 2 texts and talk about, this connection between listening and the heart. And I've often wondered, we talk a lot about listening. We ask our students a lot to listen to us. I'm not so sure we teach listening skills though. I think we say to them, when someone else is speaking, we want you to listen. But I'm not so sure we teach them what listening looks like, what listening sounds like, or what listening feels like. So we are going to play a quick game of Simon Says. Okay, I can see you. Can everybody see me? You need to see me because I'm going to be Simon. Here we go. Here we go. Simon says do that. Oh, wait, first of all, does everybody know how to play? I hope everybody knows how to play. Okay. Simon says do this. Simon says do this. Simon says do this. Do this. Oh. Okay, I'll let everybody stay in, even if you, okay, let's do it again. Simon says do this. Simon says do this. Simon says do this. Do this. We still got a few out. Better though, better. Okay, I'm gonna move over this way on my chair. Here we go, ready? Simon says do this. Simon says do this. Simon says do this. Simon says do this. Do this. Oh, good, good, good. Okay, great. Hopefully you had a little fun doing that. When was the last time you played Simon Says? Okay, what did you need to be successful at that game? Unmute yourselves. Just tell me, what do you need to be successful at that game?
To be able
Listening
to see
skills.
Listen.
Okay, but what about the listening? What did you need to be able to do?
You have to, we needed to listen to you as well as watch you.
Yes, you needed to
And
watch
also
me.
know the rules.
You definitely needed to know the rules.
Right.
You needed to know what the expectation was. You needed to be able to see me. You needed to be able to, when you say listen, what I'm going to say is, it was a combination of listening and watching. You needed to hear what I had to say, watch me, and then do it.
So you needed to understand the words, what they meant.
That's right. And you also have to recognize that not everybody has the same processing speed. That's really, really important.
And it's also, there are many who are visual learners and they're really only watching what you're doing.
Right. And that is good and bad, right? Until I say, do this.
Or you say, put your hands on your nose and you do this.
Right.
You know
I wasn't
that
gonna, Carol, that's really tough. Listen, it's 8:20 at night. I'm not doing it. But here's the point, is that when you play a game like Simon Says, you're actually teaching them what goes into listening. And you can break it down for them. What did listening look like? Well, they had to look at me. They actually had to be quiet, because if they weren't quiet, they weren't going to be able to hear me. Right? What did it feel like? Well, that depends. I don't know. What did it feel like? Maybe it felt good that they were able to focus, and maybe it didn't feel so good because I was going too fast. What did it sound like? Well, most of you were quiet. Maybe there were a little giggles. That's never bad. But again, this is a way of unpacking what we just did and practicing listening skills and going over it with them. Here's another thing, Okay, I want to make sure I go back and forth between the screens. I want you all to show me with your bodies that you could care less about what I'm saying right now. Oh, that was a heavy sigh. Okay, now show me with your bodies that you want to hear every word I have to say. Oh, you're pretty good at this. That's a prompt. That's a way to teach listening skills. That's a way of teaching what your expectations are when they're listening. Show me with your bodies that you're listening. And what does it feel like when someone's not listening and their body's turned away from you? These are ways to actually teach listening skills and have a little fun too. Okay, thank you for participating in that. And let me share my screen. We're going to talk about the last social emotional competency. Here we go. Before I do that, I just want to talk about sharing circles and greetings. These are wonderful tools and activities that provide opportunities to model and practice communication and listening skills. Also a great time to check in to see how your students are feeling. In my group, Marcia was saying that when students first come in, she has a moment where they share moments of gratitude. That's a way of checking in too. Transitional moments are wonderful opportunities to check in with our students. We all know what it feels like to really feel welcomed when someone's really happy to see us. When we greet our students, especially when we meet them at the door, it absolutely can set the tone for their learning experience. It also gives us an opportunity to practice communication and listening skills. Now you can see from this chart, there are many ways you can greet your students. What's important, whatever you choose, is that every child feels seen and heard, and that we use the time to model and practice the social emotional skills that we're teaching them. Sharing circles also provide this opportunity. I think what's really important about these two, about greetings and sharing circles, these two tools, is that you do them regularly, not as needed. Sharing circles can be used as transitional ritual, marking the beginning of the day or the end of the day, or maybe even a return from an activity. When you do a sharing circle, I personally like to use what I would call a speaker power object. For me, I usually use this, because it concretizes the notion that one person speaks at a time. So the person who's holding it is the person who's going to be speaking. And you can practice greetings and learning each other's names during sharing circles. You can use that tool BEST that I shared with you. You can prompt them. How do you show me with your bodies that you're listening to the person who's talking? How do you show me with your bodies that you're listening? You can also build relationships and get to know your students by asking them each day, I would recommend maybe if you're going to ask an in-depth question, maybe you pick 2 or 3 students each day to share information. You can use it as a set induction, have the question relate to what you're going to be teaching them. You can give your other students opportunities to ask questions, to practice tone of voice and using appropriate words. Great tools and activities for communication skills. And like I said, also checking in. So the last social emotional competency is responsible decision making. This is all about helping our students gain the skills to make caring, appropriate, and constructive choices about their behavior and when they're interacting with other people. So this is a tool that I love. As you can see, it's called a traffic light. This was originally designed by my colleague, Moshe Ben Lev. He's integrated Hebrew into it. But this gives them the steps of responsible decision making. The first thing you want to do is stop and take a few breaths. And then you want to think. You want to take a moment and think, what am I feeling? Can I identify those feelings? And also, what's the problem? Identifying the problem. Think of solutions to that problem and the possible consequences to the solution. What are some of the pitfalls? Then select the best solution. Take a minute to think about what the consequences are going to be if you choose that, and then go ahead and move forward with that plan. Now, it seems like a lot of steps, but you do this all the time. This is a matter of teaching our learners the skills. Again, to stop and breathe, that self-awareness and self-regulation, as well as the steps you need to take to make responsible decisions. And I know a couple of you, certainly Marilee and Marcia shared with me that they have also taught older students. You can use the steps to analyze a text in a similar way. So looking at a piece of text, who in the text is experiencing a problem? When I shared that text with you when Pharaoh summoned Moses, who in the text was experiencing a problem? Was it both of them? And according to whom? What was the problem? What might Moses and Pharaoh be feeling? It wasn't specifically stated in that text. What do you imagine they might be feeling? How did they solve the problem? And by the way, it's really important to talk about who actually solved the problem and what was the outcome of that. And then talk about other ways they could have solved the problem. What would the outcomes have been if they had chosen a different solution? This actually helps them also kind of engage with the text and make their own Torah, their own teaching, their own midrash. And then a really, really important step is to describe a similar problem which they personally encountered or observed or heard, in ways they solved it or ways they could have solved it better. They can role play, they can brainstorm solutions together. It's all about getting them comfortable with these steps of how to make appropriate decisions. So we are running out of time. So we don't have time to go into breakout rooms, but I do hope that in the next few weeks, you'll think about what are some of the social emotional competencies I want to address with myself and with my learners. Maybe you'll choose one of the strategies or one of the tools that I shared with you tonight. Maybe you won't, and there's another tool that you're more comfortable with. How are you going to model these competencies for your learners? What prompt might you use? And what kind of opportunities are you going to create so that your learners can practice them? I really hope that you'll think about this. And I want to end with a reflection. So here are three that I love. We're gonna choose one, but I love all three of these. The first one is called SIM. What was something that surprised, inspired, or moved you in your learning tonight? Maybe in your breakout room, maybe something a colleague said. I like the 3 A's: aha, apologize, and appreciate. Opportunities for your learners to share something that an aha moment, something that was really popped into their head and they didn't realize. Maybe they need to apologize for something, or maybe they want to share an appreciation. And then the last one is little wins, little victories that they experienced in class, highlighting a sense of an accomplishment, no matter how small, it's still a win. So I'm going to stop the share, and I'm going to ask you now to think of something that surprised, inspired, or moved you in our learning today. And if you feel comfortable, to put it in the chat. I'm going to exercise some wait time. I like wonder, notice, appreciate too. So I really want to honor the time and the fact that it's already 8:30. I want to thank you all for being here, for showing up, for participating. It was a joy for me to share my passion with social emotional learning for you. And I want to end by saying thank you. Thank you for what you do each and every day. Do not forget for 1 minute what you do is holy. You change and you affect the lives of your learners every single day. And for that, I am immensely grateful for. So thank you so much.
Nancy, thank you. We are so incredibly grateful for the learning tonight. And I think I saw Carol say that she was amazed that even at 8:30 at night, that it was such a meaningful evening. And I certainly would echo that. I want to thank our educators for being here tonight, for making the time for your own learning, to be able to bring things back to your classrooms, to be able to have those additional tools in your toolbox to be able to support your learners and each other through the school year. Thank you to the events team for helping us out tonight as well. Emily and I are really grateful for all of your contributions tonight and being with us. There will be a follow-up survey. So, you can take a look in your inbox probably in the next couple days for that. And we'll be able to share the PowerPoint slides and Nancy's resources with all of you, as well as the recording. So you'll be able to go back and look at it again, because I know how helpful that is for everybody. So again, Nancy, thank you so much. We really appreciate.
Thank you. And thank you to your team for making this such a wonderful experience for me, really. Thank you so much. Have a great night, everybody.
Good night.